Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about vegan meal prep, and this specifically what I'm doing is a vegan lunchbox meal prep. So as I talked about in my last video, the market shop video, the kids chose 5 meals that they were happy to have in their lunchboxes each week, and one of those meals was baked beans. So that's a really easy recipe that you can make in bulk, and you can freeze some down if you want to. And so that's what I'm going to make today. And while I'm making this, I'm also going to talk a little bit about some vegan substitutions, because I know that's something that some people are interested in, is, you know, how to start converting recipes and how to substitute plant-based options in for animal products. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So this recipe is one that's on my Veganuary page on Facebook. It's from a virtual vegan website, and it's just called Vegan Barbecue Baked Beans. And with this one, I make quite a few modifications to the recipe. I find it a little bit too strong in flavour for the kids, and so I reduce a lot of the things down. One of the things I'll typically reduce in almost every recipe when I'm cooking for the kids and myself as well is the garlic and the onion. I usually at least halve or sometimes completely eliminate it from recipes. The kids used to be at a school where garlic and onion actually wasn't allowed at all at the school. It's considered a stimulant by that particular school. Was sort of founded by a yoga sort of foundation, and so they didn't think onion and garlic should be fed to kids at all because it affects their learning. So yeah, our kids didn't have any for a number of years, but they seem to be okay with it now, just in small doses. So that's one of the adaptations that I make to recipes when I'm cooking for the kids. And another thing in this particular recipe is it has quite a lot of spices, you know, things like chili. I cut that out completely. This recipe's got quite a lot of apple cider vinegar in it, and I don't really think that much is needed, so I always reduce that down quite a lot as well. Where'd my garlic go? There it is. And you know, I do things like today I haven't got any blackstrap molasses, which is in the recipe, which is kind of a crucial ingredient for baked beans. It gives them that sort of syrupy flavour, but we haven't got any, so I'm just going to use a bit of brown rice syrup instead. And I'm making a double batch of this recipe so that I can have enough to feed the kids for dinner tonight, and then do at least one lunchbox through the week, and then hopefully have enough for either me or Ben to have a meal out of it as well, or make some for the freezer. So that's one of the benefits of using something like, I cook beans in the Instant Pot, which is a pressure cooker. It's got quite a big capacity, so I can easily make a double batch in there. So when you're thinking about substitutions, trying to go vegan, some of the common things that you'll need to watch out for in recipes are honey. Honey is an easy substitute. You can just use either maple syrup or coconut syrup. Both are yummy. Things like, you know, I do a really nice butter tofu recipe. So that's like a, you know, sort of traditional Indian butter chicken dish. And I just replace the tofu. If there's a recipe that calls for cream, you can almost always replace that with coconut cream. Coconut cream is a little bit sweeter, and so sometimes it will change the flavour of the recipe slightly, so just be aware of that. You know, if there's any sugar in the recipe, cut that out to compensate. Things like eggs, you can easily just use a ground up flax egg or ground chia egg, so that's 1 tablespoon of ground flax or chia seeds to 2.5 tablespoons of water. Mix it up, let it sit for 5 minutes, and it gels. And then you can use that as an egg replacement in most recipes, like your baking recipes, or if you need something to sort of combine things a little bit better. So there's some great options as well. And, you know, just get a little bit creative. Don't be so stuck and rigid about cooking and having to follow a recipe exactly. That's one of the things I've really loved about going more and more down the vegan path, is that I'm a lot more creative with recipes these days. I hardly ever follow a recipe exactly as it's written. I'll usually make my own modifications, and most of the time I cook without recipes as well, especially if I'm making a salad or a smoothie or something like that. You just get a really great feel for what feels good in your body, the balance of ingredients that's right for you, food combining, which I talked about in an earlier video, you know, what works for you and what doesn't, and what upsets your belly and what doesn't. And so you can become a lot more intuitive with your cooking and cook more that way, instead of always having to follow somebody else's directions. So the beans, I'm using little white beans for this recipe. So these again are a bean that I bought in bulk, a 5 kilo lot of these. I haven't soaked these beans. I mentioned that in the video about beans and soy and sugars. I don't soak my beans since having the pressure cooker, because I haven't found that there's a need to. But I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she really thinks that you should be soaking your beans, and she actually soaks hers for 3 days, changing the water. So she keeps them in the fridge, soaks them for 3 days, and changes the water every day. And then when you make, you know, like a baked bean recipe or something, you don't have to pre-cook the beans, which I don't either when I do this recipe. You just put them straight in and they just cook within the sauce. So that's another way, and particularly if you do have difficulties digesting your beans, start slow. Just start with a small amount of beans a few times a week. Just get your gut used to it. The gut's got to develop the microbiome that will do the digestion for you. And maybe consider soaking so that you can eliminate some of the, I guess, toxins or sort of compounds that make the beans more difficult for you to digest. So I haven't soaked these, but I have rinsed them, and that's something that's also really important if you're using legumes. So beans and lentils, if you wash them and rinse them, particularly lentils, I find they're really dirty. So you've got to at least soak them for, you know, 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, and then give them a good wash to get the dirt off. Rice, I soak all my rice as well and do the same, and give that a really good rinse to get the starch off and get all the dirt off. And quinoa is another good one. So if you've ever tried quinoa but you haven't cooked it, if you haven't soaked it, rinsed it and cooked it properly, it probably didn't taste that great. It was still quite bitter. The bitter nature of the quinoa comes from the saponin in the quinoa. If you soak it for a good 15 minutes before you're ready to cook it, and then rinse it in a sieve under running water and give it a really good wash until the water coming off the quinoa is almost clear, then that's going to eliminate all of the saponins, which is the bitter flavour. And then you just cook it in, so say you've got 1 cup of quinoa, you add 1 1/4 cups of water or veggie stock, put the lid on, bring it to the boil, and then turn it down to simmer, and simmer it for 15 minutes and turn it off, and you've got beautiful fluffy quinoa that's not bitter. So a nice little tip for you if you do want to include quinoa in your diet. So I'm just draining that water off the beans so I can use this now to start sauteing the onion and the garlic. One thing I'll mention is I don't saute in oil. I use just water, or just the water that's already in the onion and the garlic, or a little bit that's left in the pan from soaking the beans, or sometimes I'll saute in a little bit of stock. And I do that because most oils are rancid by the time you buy them, so it's important to try and eliminate a lot of that rancid toxicity from your diet and therefore your body as much as you can. So certainly if you are cooking in oil, make sure you're getting a really good quality oil, and make sure you're using an oil that can cope with higher temperatures. So things like flaxseed oil and olive oil should never be heated. They denature and they become really toxic, and your body's just got to deal with that. So you're better off using something like coconut oil that can deal with those higher temperatures without being denatured. So I'm just popping that on to saute, and then I'm going to check the recipe and see what I need to do next. So this recipe's got a few spices in there like cumin, dried rosemary I haven't got any of, so I'm going to use this nice little rags mix, which is a combination of a few spices. It's a yummy one. I also might add a drop of rosemary essential oil at the end as well, and that just makes it really beautifully fragrant, and it's a replacement for rosemary. I have got some fresh rosemary in the garden, but the kids don't like their food overly spicy, so I tend to just use little bits in their dinners. What else can we talk about with regards to replacement? I guess milk's another good one. So if your recipe calls for milk, almost any plant milk will work. You know, you can make milk from hemp seeds, you can make it from rice, you can make it from coconut, you can make it from nuts, you can make it from a combination of all of those things. And so virtually any milk will work in any recipe when it calls for milk. Butter, coconut oil tends to work as a good replacement for butter in most circumstances. Eggs, we already talked about with regards to baking. Obviously you're not going to get that result if you're trying to make a quiche, but I just don't cook quiche anymore. You know, even things like bacon, you can find replacements for bacon. You can actually make a really yummy bacon from eggplant in a dehydrator or in your oven at a low temperature. Or you can use tempeh cut really, really thin and bake that in the oven until it goes a little bit crispy, and it's kind of like bacon but much healthier for you. No carcinogens, no saturated fats, going to be a much better option for you. And again, use Google. If you get stuck with something, if it's a recipe that you're cooking every week, like maybe the kids love spag bowl, search on Google for a vegan spag bowl. Quirky Cooking's got a great recipe that's made with lentils and it's really delicious, so maybe check that one out. But yeah, it's always an easy thing to replace. There's also this thing called savoury yeast flakes. It's also called nutritional yeast. So if you're trying to get a cheesy flavour into a sauce, then that's a great thing to add. You can put it in your salad dressings as well. Our kids love that, just sprinkled on top of pasta. It's kind of like their Parmesan cheese. We just call it cheesy flakes. So they sprinkle that on their pastas or risottos or those kinds of dishes. The cooking class I went to with Sarah from New Earth Cafe, she made this amazing cauliflower cheese that she topped the lasagna with, and that had the nutritional yeast flakes in it, which is where you get the cheesy flavour from. So I'll try and maybe post that recipe on the Facebook page if anyone's interested in that. So I'm just going to take a break for a minute while I get this recipe sorted, and then I'll come back in a minute and talk about a couple more things to finish it off. See you in a sec. Okay, so baked beans are in the Instant Pot now. They're cooking away. Just let it do its thing. You don't have to do anything else. At the end of the cooking, a good little tip for you from Sarah at New Earth Cafe is if you're doing any kind of, like a lentil bolognese sauce or a lasagna sauce or any kind of pasta sauce or a bean dish or a curry, take about a cup out from your cooked product. Take a cup out and blend that up so it's really nice and thick, and then add that back in to the end product. Give it a good mix, and that will make it really nice and thick and creamy. So once these beans are done, I'm going to do that with those as well. So that's it for today. In tomorrow's video I'm going to talk a little bit more about vegan substitutes and what you can use in place of things in your cooking, or things that you can use as sort of quick healthy options when you want to make a plant-based meal. So we'll see you for that one tomorrow. See you guys.